The sun hung, suspended in the crystal-clear blue sky, its rays reflecting off the ancient stone walls of the royal square, where hundreds of tourists had gathered to witness the solemn changing of the guard. Camera shutters clicked incessantly. Children's laughter and chatter blended into the bustling atmosphere. Everyone was immersed in the beauty of this place, until a piercing sound shattered the tranquility. Thud! Thud! Clank! A soda can was kicked across the square, tumbling over the marble pavement, leaving behind a long streak of liquid that glistened under the midday sun like a trail of blood. The crowd flinched slightly, turning their eyes toward Leon Carter, the man responsible for the noise. He stood there rugged and unkempt, hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn-out jacket, his hair a tangled mess that looked as if it had not seen a comb in a week. His bloodshot eyes, whether from alcohol or from countless sleepless nights, held something unmistakable: anger. Not the kind of anger that flares up over something specific, but the simmering resentment of a man who felt the world had wronged him. A crooked smirk crept onto his face as he saw the crowd instinctively step back. Scared? Good. He stepped forward, the heels of his boots striking the stone floor with sharp, hollow echoes. A middle-aged man, standing nearby and caught off guard, failed to move in time and was shoved aside roughly. Out of my way, old man. The man stumbled, nearly losing his balance, his eyes filled with surprise. But he simply lowered his head and moved aside, just like everyone else. A cruel smile flickered across Leon's face. He liked this feeling, the power that came from the fear of the weak. He scanned the area, searching for another target. His gaze settled on a young boy, no older than 8, clutching his mother's hand, his round eyes wide with fear. Leon slowly advanced, his steps deliberately heavy, like a wolf circling its prey. Hey, kid. Before he could finish his sentence, the boy's mother pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him as if shielding him from a living nightmare. A low chuckle escaped Leon's lips. He relished the way people recoiled from him, as if he were something filthy and dangerous. He loved this feeling, the feeling of control. But then something caught his attention. A man stood there, not stepping back. No bowed head, no avoidance. A guardsman, standing tall, unmoving, his gaze fixed forward as if nothing in the world could shake him. Leon sneered. Let's see. How long can you stand still? He strode forward, the stench of alcohol on his breath carrying the weight of a challenge. Leon strode forward, his heavy boots striking against the marble floor of the square, each step deliberate, a predator seeking a reaction from its prey. But this time he did not choose a weak tourist or an easily intimidated child. He chose a guard. Ethan Blake stood there, motionless like a statue. The sunlight gleamed off his perfectly pressed dark blue uniform, his brass buttons shining without a single scratch. Pristine white gloves, polished boots, rifle held firm against his shoulder, a symbol of discipline, of honor, of untouchability. But to Leon, it was all a joke. How the hell are you still standing? His voice cut through the stillness, slicing through the air like a blunt, brutal blade. Ethan did not move. Leon clicked his tongue, shaking his head as if he had just witnessed the most absurd thing imaginable. He stepped closer, breaching the restricted space, so near that he could feel the chill of the white gloves gripping the rifle. You lot are the biggest joke in this country. Standing here, silent like wooden dolls, while out there, people like me are fighting every day just to survive. Ethan still did not respond. That silence drove Leon mad. He was used to getting a reaction when he spoke. Whether it was fear or anger, people always responded. But this soldier? He gave him nothing. Leon clenched his teeth and deliberately rammed his shoulder into Ethan. No reaction. The fury in him flared. Are you deaf? Or do you think you are better than me? He leaned in, the stench of alcohol heavy in his breath, washing over the soldier's cold, stoic face. Ethan did not blink. And then Leon realized something. This silence was not fear. He had seen fear before, in the eyes of the weak when he threatened them. But this soldier? There was nothing in his gaze. No anger, no contempt, no fear, only discipline. a kind of discipline Leon had never understood, had never experienced in his life. And that enraged him even more. He raised a hand, not to strike, but to touch Ethan's uniform, where the brass buttons gleamed. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Everyone knew touching a guard was a serious offense. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened ever so slightly, a minuscule reaction, but one that anyone observant enough would notice. But Leon only saw what he wanted to see. He thought, finally, he had cracked the soldier's rigid composure. "Ah, so you can react after all?" He smirked, his fingers sliding down to one of the brass buttons, deliberately twisting it. Ethan did not move, but the air around him turned to ice. The crowd held its breath. Then, a voice rang out, deep, aged, but unwavering. "Young man, you should not do that." Leon spun around, scowling. An elderly man sat in a wheelchair, his eyes not filled with anger, but sharper than any glare Leon had ever encountered. Across his chest was a row of medals, marks of war, of true sacrifice. Rick Evans, a veteran, a man who had lost his legs on the battlefield, but had never lost the spirit of a warrior. Leon scoffed. "And who the hell are you?" Rick did not answer right away. He looked straight at Leon, the kind of look that came from a man who had seen too many like him before. Men lost, angry at the world for their own failures. Finally he spoke. "I am someone who understands something you never have, true strength." For a moment, Leon hesitated, but then he let out a laugh, dripping with mockery. "You think you understand strength? You sit there powerless while I stand here. Who's really stronger, huh?" Rick only smiled faintly. "You still do not understand anything." Leon clenched his fists, feeling strangely provoked. Leon strode toward Rick, the smirk still lingering on his face, but in his eyes there was no longer mere mockery. There was something else, a flicker of confusion, a hint of inexplicable anger. He had thought that Ethan Blake, the Royal Guard, would be the perfect target to bring down. He had been waiting for a reaction, a furrowed brow, a small movement to seize and crush. But there was nothing. Ethan just stood there, like a statue, as if Leon was not even worth responding to. That made Leon feel small. He hated that feeling, and now he had found a different target, a frail old man sitting in a wheelchair. Someone he could look down on, someone he was certain would not make him feel small again. "What did you just say?" Leon tilted his chin, stepping closer to Rick, his eyes glinting with challenge. Rick did not back away. Of course, he could not, but there was something in his gaze that made the crowd understand that even if he could, he would not. "I said," Rick emphasized each word, "you do not understand what true strength is." Leon laughed, a dry, hollow sound, yet there was tension in it. "Strength?" He leaned in closer, his voice lowering but still dripping with mockery. "You sit here in your wheelchair while I stand. I can do whatever I want. But you, what can you do?" He pushed lightly against the armrest of the wheelchair, as if to prove his point. Rick's gaze remained steady. "What do you think strength is, Leon?" For the first time in this entire conversation, his name was spoken clearly, solemnly, not with mockery, not with contempt, but as if Rick knew him better than he knew himself. Leon did not like that. "Strength," he asserted, his eyes burning with growing anger, "is the ability to control others. The ability to make people fear you." Rick nodded slightly, as if he had heard this answer many times before. "So, do you think I'm afraid of you?" Leon hesitated. "If not, then what?" Rick did not answer immediately. He looked Leon straight in the eye, the gaze of a man who had seen things Leon had never dared to face. "Fear is not strength," he said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Strength is standing firm, even when everything around you is falling apart. Strength is when you have every reason to do the wrong thing, but you still choose to do what is right. Strength is when you do not need others to fear you in order to feel valuable." Leon frowned, his hands unconsciously clenching into fists. "Nonsense. Is it?" Rick tilted his head slightly, his gaze never wavering. "Then why are you so angry?" The question cut through Leon's armor like a sharp dagger. He had no immediate answer. He wanted to say that he was not angry, but his entire body, from the way his fists clenched to the way his teeth ground together, was betraying him. He had once believed that making others afraid was strength. But now, he was the one feeling weak, and he hated it. Enough! He grabbed the wheelchair's armrest and shook it roughly. The crowd gasped, some even screamed. But Rick's expression did not change. No pleading, no panic in his eyes, no rage, only unwavering resolve. And that drove Leon mad. "Look at you!" Leon shouted, his voice trembling slightly, something even he failed to notice. "You are useless. You have lost your legs. You can no longer stand. You are no longer a soldier. You are nothing but a corpse." Rick closed his eyes briefly, as if hearing something he had heard far too many times before. Then he opened them again, and within them was nothing but tranquility. "Do you think a soldier is only his legs?" Leon froze. Rick chuckled softly. "You understand nothing, Leon. You do not understand what makes a soldier. What makes a true man." Leon hated the way he spoke. Not with anger, not with scorn, but with regret, as if he felt sorry for him. "Shut up. Strength does not lie in the body, Leon," Rick continued, his voice gentle. Yet every word struck like a hammer against Leon's perception. "It lies in the will, in what you choose to protect, in what you are willing to sacrifice." Leon took a deep breath. He did not want to hear any more. He needed to regain control. He needed to take back the upper hand, and he knew exactly how to do it. He stepped back, inhaled deeply, then suddenly grabbed the wheelchair's armrest and yanked it hard. Rick collapsed onto the marble floor, a heavy fall, yet utterly silent. No cry of pain, no desperate struggle. But the crowd was stunned. Sharp gasps echoed. A few women raised their hands to their mouths. Some children clung to their parents, sobbing softly. Yet amidst all that chaos, one person remained silent. Ethan Blake moved. For the first time throughout this confrontation, the Royal Guard broke his still stance. Every step he took carried purpose, and Leon felt it. He turned, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second as he recognized Ethan's towering form advancing toward him. Not rushing, not enraged, but unstoppable. Leon tried to regain his bravado, forcing out a sneering grin. "Oh, so you finally moved, guard? I thought you were just a living statue." Ethan said nothing. He walked straight past Leon to Rick. Without hesitation, without a moment's doubt, he knelt down, his pristine white gloves touching the worn uniform of the veteran, helping him sit up. The respect in that gesture carried more weight than any words ever could. Rick smiled faintly. His eyes met Ethan's, as if he had known from the very start that this young soldier would not let things go too far. But Leon did not see it that way. He felt abandoned, ignored. For a moment, he had believed he was in control. But now, he was being pushed aside, made insignificant, and it burned inside him. He had to do something. His foot lashed out, kicking the wheelchair. The sharp clang of metal against stone rang out as it toppled over once more. Rick watched it, yet showed no sign of anger. And that was what truly drove Leon mad. "Look at you," he roared, his voice thick with rage and confusion. "Do you see now? You are nothing. No strength, no weapons, no control. You are nobody." Rick gazed up at him, calm, as if Leon had just uttered the most foolish thing in the world. "You are wrong, Leon." Leon's jaw clenched. "Why do you keep talking like that?" Rick exhaled slowly. "Because I have seen men like you on the battlefield, and I know what you are about to do next." Leon froze. For a moment, just a moment, a cold chill ran down his spine. Then he shook his head, pushing the feeling away. "You think you know me?" He laughed, but the confidence from before had faded. "You know nothing about me, old man." "But me?" He grabbed Rick by the collar, yanking him close, his breath reeking of alcohol as it washed over the veteran's face. "I know you, a man clinging to the past because he cannot face the present. A lonely old fool, forgotten, abandoned. And now I'm going to show you just how true that is." He raised his fist, ready to strike the aged face before him. But he never got the chance, because a gloved hand had seized his wrist tight, like an iron shackle, unbreakable. No one in the crowd saw the exact moment Leon realized he had gone too far. But he knew. Ethan slowly rose to his full height, gripping Leon's wrist firmly, locking eyes with him. For the first time, Leon felt the sheer weight of this soldier's presence. No words of warning, no anger in his expression, no threats, just a look from a man who knew he could end this in an instant, but chose not to. Leon swallowed dryly. He tried to jerk his arm free, but Ethan's grip did not budge. Then the soldier spoke. "You have done enough." His voice was not loud, not harsh, yet it carried the weight of a mountain. A few hesitant claps began in the crowd, then grew louder. But Leon heard nothing over the pounding of his own heartbeat. He had lost control, and he did not know what to do. Ethan squeezed his wrist just slightly, just enough for him to feel the power behind it. Now the guard said, "Step back." For the first time in his life, Leon felt fear. Leon took a deep breath, trying to regain himself, but inside there was only one thing: loss of control. He could not comprehend what was happening. All his life, he had been the one in charge. When he shouted, others bowed. When he threatened, others stepped back. But now, he was no longer in control. Rick Evans still looked at him with the eyes of a man who had already foreseen the outcome. Ethan Blake had not stepped back, and the hand gripping his wrist had not let go. In that moment, Leon understood that he had gone too far. The problem was he did not know how to stop. He could not back down. He could not accept being the weaker one. Confusion, failure, and rage swelled in his chest, driving him to do what any desperate man would. He struggled, trying to break free. "Let me go, you bastard!" He jerked his arm violently, but Ethan did not budge. The guard's eyes remained calm, yet within them, a storm brewed. Ethan did not need to shout. He did not need to intimidate. He did not need to threaten. He only needed his presence. And Leon felt it in the most painful way. He sucked in a sharp breath, raised his free hand, and aimed a punch straight at Ethan's face. But before his fist could land, everything changed. A swift, precise motion, so quick it was almost imperceptible. Bam! Leon's entire arm was twisted behind his back, pinned tightly against his spine. Pain exploded through his shoulder, forcing him to his knees by sheer reflex. Ethan had not needed much force. He was not some street thug throwing wild punches. He was a soldier, trained to subdue his opponent in mere seconds. And Leon had never faced someone like that before. He hissed, growled, but was restrained so completely that he could not move an inch. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice cold, carrying the weight of discipline and duty. "Is that enough?" Leon gritted his teeth. "Go to hell." The slap struck like thunder. Smack! The sound echoed across the square, bouncing off every marble stone, making the crowd instinctively flinch. Leon's head snapped to the side, a red mark blooming instantly on his cheek. He could not believe it. He, the one who had always instilled fear in others, had been struck, not by some thug, not by a policeman, but by a royal guard, by a man who did not need his fists to make him tremble. The crowd held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Leon was frozen, half in shock, half in uncertainty. He wanted to strike back, but he knew he would lose. Not just physically, but in every sense of the word. Ethan remained still, unchanged, unshaken. Simply a man who had done what needed to be done. Leon swallowed hard, slowly turning his head back, his eyes no longer filled with rage, only bitterness. Ethan met his gaze, and there was no contempt, no gloating, just a simple question. "Do you understand now?" Leon did not answer, could not answer, because he understood. He understood that from the very beginning, he had never been in control of anything. He understood that true strength did not belong to the loudest, nor to the most aggressive, but to the one who remained composed, even when provoked beyond reason. Ethan released him. Leon stood still for a moment, as if he did not know what to do next. Then he took a step back. For the first time in his life, he was the one retreating. He turned his head, looking at Rick one last time. The old man still sat there, calm and unwavering, as if Leon had never had any power over him to begin with. Leon felt suffocated. He turned away, walking swiftly, slipping through the crowd. And no one stopped him. But everyone knew he was not running from the guard. He was running from himself. Ethan turned back to Rick, quietly bending down to pick up the wheelchair. He did not need to say anything. But when Rick's eyes met his, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between soldiers. No words were necessary. No gestures were needed. Only deep respect. Rick gave a faint smile, nodding at Ethan, as if to say, "You did well, young man." Ethan set the wheelchair upright, gently helping Rick back into his seat. Then, with a motion so precise it was nearly flawless, he returned to his position, resuming his stance. Unmoving, dignified, an unyielding wall of steel. But this time, the people looked at him differently. No longer as just a living statue, no longer as a mere soldier enforcing order, but as a true warrior, a protector, a symbol of real strength. Leon walked, but he did not truly know where he was going. Each step he took on the marble pavement of the square felt like a hammer striking his mind. He could hear the murmurs of the crowd behind him, feel their eyes burning into his back, some with contempt, some with curiosity. But what unsettled him the most was the pity. For the first time in his life, he felt unbearably small. He had entered this square with his head held high, believing himself to be the strongest, the one who could command others, force them to bow. But now, he was the only one who had to bow. His fingers touched his cheek, where Ethan Blake's slap still burned. Not just from pain, but because it had shattered the illusion he had built for so long. The control, the fear he instilled, the power he thought he possessed, all of it had crumbled. Leon hesitated, about to turn around, but then a hand gripped his shoulder. The police. He flinched, instinctively trying to pull away, but at that moment, he realized he no longer had a choice. "He's hours from here." The officer's cold voice stirred the familiar anger inside him. But he no longer had the strength to resist. As the two officers led him away, he stole one last glance behind him. Ethan Blake was still standing there. No words were needed. No further movement. Yet his presence alone was a statement more powerful than anything else. And Rick Evans? He remained seated in his wheelchair, showing no sign of triumph. No gloating gaze. No mocking smile. Only a steady, unwavering look, calm, yet weighted with meaning. As if he were saying, "I do not hate you, Leon. I only pity you." Leon lowered his head. He did not want to look anymore. The police led Leon away, the crowd slowly dispersing, but no one left immediately. They had just witnessed something they would never forget. A lesson in true strength. A stark contrast between violence and discipline, between rage and unwavering resolve. And at the very center of it all, Ethan Blake stood firm, like a fortress. He did not watch the thug being taken away. He did not concern himself with the whispers around him. His mission was never about revenge or proving himself. His mission was to protect, and he had done exactly that. Rick Evans adjusted the medals on his chest. Ethan glanced down at him and gave a single nod, a simple gesture, yet heavy with meaning between those who had served. Rick smiled. "Well done, son." Ethan said nothing. He simply lifted his hand in a sharp salute, not the kind performed for tourists, but the kind meant for a true comrade. Rick returned the salute in his own way, slow but no less dignified. A small gesture, yet carrying the weight of a lifetime of service. Ethan returned to his post, standing just as he had before. But this time, the way people looked at him had changed. No longer just a living statue, no longer an empty ritual, but a true warrior, a soldier who stood not just for appearance, but for protection, a symbol. Minutes later, a middle-aged man approached Rick, emotion still lingering in his gaze. "Mr. Evans, what just happened? It was—" Rick smiled faintly and cut him off. "No need to thank me, my friend. The one who deserves the credit is that young soldier." The man turned to Ethan, bowing his head slightly. "Thank you for what you have done." At that moment, Ethan moved just slightly but enough to matter. He said nothing, but his eyes answered, "I was just doing my duty." And as the crowd slowly dispersed, each person carried something with them. a story they would never forget. The evening sunlight draped over the royal square, stretching shadows across the marble ground. The scene that had just unfolded still echoed in the air. A confrontation that was not merely between two men, but between two ideologies, two understandings of power. Leon had left, not in the way he had wanted, not as the victor, but as a defeated man, not by someone else, but by himself. Perhaps tomorrow, he would justify it to himself. Perhaps he would try to forget today's humiliation. But the truth remained unchanged. He had learned a lesson, and Ethan Blake, he returned to his position, standing tall and motionless as before. But to those who had witnessed the moment, he was no longer the same. They no longer saw him as just a simple guard. They saw a true warrior, a man who understood that real strength did not lie in brute force, nor in overpowering others, but in resilience, loyalty, and discipline. Strength was not about instilling fear, but about protecting what was worth defending. Rick Evans looked at Ethan, his old eyes still sharp. In this young soldier, he saw the reflection of his former comrades. Steadfastness, calm in the face of the storm, respect for honor and duty. A faint smile formed on his lips. There are those who are born to be warriors, and you are one of them. Ethan said nothing, but in his nod, there was a deep understanding. They were soldiers. They did not need to boast. They did not need to prove themselves. They only needed to stand firm. This story might be just a fleeting moment in an ordinary day, a minor confrontation between three strangers. But to those who witnessed it, it carried a far deeper meaning. It reminded us of the true essence of strength. Strength is not in fists, not in threats, not in crushing the weak. True strength lies in self-control, in loyalty to what is right, and in the courage to stand up for those values. Rick Evans had fought in war, had lost his legs, but he had never lost his will, his honor, or his resolve. Leon had a whole body, a loud voice, strong fists. But in the end, he was the weak one because he could not control himself, because he could not grasp the true meaning of strength. Ethan did not need to raise his voice. He did not need unnecessary violence. He stood his ground, and that was enough. Because men like Ethan, like Rick, those who understand sacrifice, discipline, and honor, are the ones who keep the world in order. And what about you? If you were in Ethan Blake's place, what would you have done? If you were Rick Evans, how would you have faced the provocation? And more importantly, in everyday life, when faced with injustice, when witnessing someone being oppressed, when standing at the crossroads between silence and action, what will you choose? Will you stand still? Or will you stand up? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonates with you, share it. Because sometimes a simple story can remind us of the most important things.